My name is Jessica, and I'm about to tell you a story that changed everything I thought I knew about family, love, and worth. But to understand how I got here, you need to know where I came from. I was born the second child to parents who already had their perfect son. Ryan was 3 years older than me, and from the moment I could understand words, I knew he was the sun around which our family revolved. He was the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong, the child my parents bragged about to anyone who would listen. Me? I was just Jessica, the girl who asked too many questions, the daughter who was too independent for her own good, the child who apparently didn't know her place. Growing up in our house was like living in a spotlight that never quite reached where I was standing. When Ryan scored a goal in soccer, Dad would beam with pride and tell everyone at work about his champion son. When I made honor roll, Mom would nod absently and remind me that grades weren't everything, that I should focus more on being likable and feminine. When Ryan decided he wanted to be a musician, they bought him a guitar, paid for lessons, and drove him to every open mic night in town. When I said I wanted to study business, they asked why I couldn't just find a nice husband like other girls my age. The thing about being the overlooked child is that you learn to be self-sufficient really quickly. While Ryan was getting help with his homework, I was teaching myself. While he was having his laundry done and his room cleaned, I was learning to take care of myself. While he was being celebrated for mediocre achievements, I was pushing myself to excel, hoping that maybe, just maybe, if I worked hard enough, I could earn even a fraction of the attention he got just for existing. By the time I was 16, I had already started working part-time jobs. Not because we needed the money, but because I knew that if I wanted anything in life, I was going to have to work for it myself. My parents saw this as rebellious behavior. They couldn't understand why I wouldn't just relax and enjoy being a teenager like Ryan did. But here's the thing about my dad that made everything so complicated. Behind closed doors, when no one else was around, he was different. He would quietly ask about my grades, and I'd catch this flash of pride in his eyes when I told him about my achievements. He'd slip me $20 and tell me to keep up the good work, in a voice so low it was almost a whisper. Sometimes, late at night when I was studying at the kitchen table, he'd come down for a glass of water and pause by my books. He'd look at my homework, nod approvingly, and say things like, "You're really smart. You know that?" But these moments felt stolen, like secrets we weren't supposed to share. The next morning at breakfast, when Mom would make some comment about how I was too focused on school and needed to learn to have fun, Dad would go quiet. He'd look down at his coffee, and that moment of connection we'd shared the night before would disappear like it never happened. This became the pattern of our relationship. Private encouragement, public silence. He was proud of me in the shadows but never in the light where it mattered. When I graduated valedictorian of my high school class, Mom's first comment wasn't congratulations. It was, "Well, I hope all that studying was worth missing out on a normal teenage experience." Dad squeezed my shoulder and said, "Good job, kiddo." But when his friends asked about the graduation ceremony, he spent 10 minutes talking about Ryan's latest gig at a local coffee shop. College was my escape route, and I took it. I applied for every scholarship I could find, worked 2 jobs, and put myself through business school. My parents attended my graduation, but I still remember Mom's face when she saw other families taking photos and celebrating. She looked embarrassed, like she couldn't understand why everyone was making such a big deal about degrees and achievements. After college, I moved to the city and started climbing the corporate ladder. I was hungry for success in a way that only people who've been overlooked can understand. Every promotion, every achievement, every recognition felt like proof that I was worth something, even if my own family couldn't see it. I'd call home every few weeks, and the conversations were always the same. Mom would update me on Ryan's life in detail, his latest girlfriend, his new apartment, his job prospects. When she asked about my life, it felt like an afterthought. "And how are you, dear?" in that tone that suggested she was asking out of obligation rather than genuine interest. When I got promoted to senior marketing executive at 28, making more money than anyone in my family had ever dreamed of, Mom's response was, "That's nice, dear. You know, Ryan is thinking about settling down soon. We're hoping for grandchildren." That's when I realized something that took me years to accept. In my family, my achievements would never be enough because they were the wrong kind of achievements. I was successful in ways they didn't value, and worse, I was successful in ways that made them uncomfortable. My independence challenged their worldview about what daughters should be. The harder I worked, the more distance grew between us. Not because I was pulling away, but because every step forward I took seemed to highlight everything they thought was wrong with me. I was too ambitious, too focused on career, too independent, too much of everything they didn't want in a daughter. By the time I turned 30, I had built a life that I was genuinely proud of. I had a beautiful apartment, a job I loved, amazing friends who celebrated my successes, and eventually I met David. David was everything I didn't know I was looking for. He was proud of my accomplishments, supported my ambitions, and never once suggested that I should be smaller or quieter or less driven. But even with all this success and happiness, there was still this part of me that craved my family's approval. That little girl who had worked so hard for recognition was still there, hoping that someday they would see me the way David did, the way my friends did, the way I was finally learning to see myself. I didn't know it then, but that recognition would come in the most unexpected and heartbreaking way possible. And it would change everything I thought I knew about my father, my family, and myself. But that part of the story comes later. First, you need to understand how bad things got before they got better. You need to know about the night that changed everything. The night I finally realized that some battles aren't worth fighting, and some people will never see your worth no matter how hard you try to prove it. That night was at my cousin's wedding, and it was the beginning of the end of the family I thought I belonged to. The breaking point came at my cousin Emily's wedding 2 years ago. I almost didn't go. David and I had just gotten engaged and we were planning our own future together. But Emily had always been kind to me growing up, one of the few family members who actually seemed interested in my life, so I decided to make the effort. I should have trusted my instincts and stayed home. The wedding was beautiful, everything Emily had dreamed of. I was genuinely happy for her, and I thought maybe this could be one of those rare family occasions where we could all just enjoy being together without the usual drama. I was wrong. The trouble started during the cocktail hour. I was talking to some family friends, telling them about my recent promotion and our engagement. I was actually feeling good, relaxed even. David looked handsome in his suit, and for once I felt like I belonged somewhere in this family gathering. That's when Mom appeared at my elbow like she had materialized out of thin air. "Jessica," she said in that tone I knew meant trouble. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" She pulled me aside, away from the group I'd been talking to, and I could see that look on her face. The one that meant she was about to say something that was supposed to be for my own good. "You know," she said, adjusting my necklace like I was still 5 years old, "you really shouldn't be talking about work so much at family events. People don't come to weddings to hear about corporate achievements." I felt my chest tighten, but I tried to stay calm. "Mom, they asked about my life. I was just sharing what's been happening." "Well, it makes you seem boastful," she continued. "And speaking of your life, when are you and David going to start thinking about children? You're 30 now, Jessica. You can't focus on career forever." Before I could respond, she was already walking away, leaving me standing there feeling like I'd been slapped. But that was just the warm-up act for what was coming. The real disaster happened during dinner. I was seated at the family table, which should have been an honor, but instead felt like being placed in the center of a minefield. Ryan was there with his latest girlfriend, a sweet girl named Amanda who hung on his every word like he was reciting poetry instead of talking about his part-time job at a music store. The conversation naturally turned to life updates. Ryan talked about a gig he'd booked at a local bar, and everyone responded like he just announced he was headlining Madison Square Garden. Mom beamed with pride, Dad nodded approvingly, and various aunts and uncles chimed in with encouragement and questions. Then someone asked about me. And Jessica, how are things going with you? I heard you got another promotion. I should have just smiled and said fine, and changed the subject. But I was feeling defensive after Mom's earlier comments, and I guess I wanted to prove that my achievements mattered too. Yes, actually things are going really well, I said. I just made senior director, and we're launching a new campaign that I'm leading. It's been really exciting to see all the hard work pay off. That's when Mom decided to drop the bomb that would end our relationship forever. Well, she said, loud enough for half the reception to hear, I suppose someone has to be the career woman in the family. She let out this fake little laugh that made my blood run cold. Though I do worry about Jessica sometimes. She's so focused on work that she's forgotten what really matters. She's 30 years old and still acts like she's 22 and fresh out of college. The table went quiet. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, and I knew my face was burning with embarrassment and anger. Mom, I said quietly, that's not fair. But she wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting started. I mean, look at Ryan, she continued, gesturing toward my brother like he was Exhibit A in some case she was making. He's got his priorities straight. He's not so consumed with climbing some corporate ladder that he's forgotten about family and relationships. He knows what really matters in life. I felt something crack inside my chest. All those years of being compared to Ryan, all those years of having my achievements minimized, all those years of being made to feel like success was somehow a character flaw, and she was doing it again. In public. At a family wedding. In front of everyone. What exactly are you trying to say, Mom? I asked, and my voice was shakier than I wanted it to be. She looked right at me with this expression I'll never forget. It was like she was looking at a stranger she didn't like very much. I'm saying that we're embarrassed to call you our daughter sometimes, Jessica. You're so selfish and self-centered. You think you're better than everyone else because you have some fancy job and make good money. But what good is any of that if you don't have a family? If you don't have children? What's the point of all this success if you're just going to end up alone? The entire table was dead silent now. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. My own mother had just publicly disowned me at a family wedding because I was successful. But she still wasn't finished. Ryan understands what family means, she continued. He makes time for the people he loves. He doesn't think he's too important to call home or visit. He doesn't act like he's too good for us. That's when Ryan decided to join the attack. Mom's right, Jess, he said, and his voice had this tone of fake concern that made me want to scream. You've changed. Ever since you moved to the city and got that big job, you've been different. You used to be fun. Now you're just, I don't know, you're just so serious all the time. So uptight. I looked around the table hoping someone would defend me, hoping someone would point out how cruel and unfair this was. My aunts and uncles were staring at their plates. My cousins were pretending to be fascinated by their drinks. And my father, the man who had quietly encouraged me all those years, the man who had told me I was smart and should keep up the good work, was sitting there in complete silence. Dad, I said, and my voice broke on the word. Are you going to say anything? He looked up at me, and for just a second, I saw something that might have been regret or sadness in his eyes. But then he looked away and said nothing. Nothing. The man who had privately told me he was proud of me couldn't find his voice when I needed him most. That's when I realized I was completely alone at that table. These people who were supposed to be my family had just torn me apart in public, and not one of them was going to defend me. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking with adrenaline and hurt and anger. You want to know why I don't call more often? I said, and my voice was steadier now, fueled by a kind of clarity I'd never felt before. You want to know why I don't visit as much as Ryan does? It's because every time I'm around you, you make me feel like there's something wrong with me for being successful. You make me feel like I should apologize for working hard and achieving my goals. I picked up my purse and looked around the table one more time. I'm not embarrassed by who I am, I said. But apparently you are. So let me solve that problem for you. I walked away from that table, and I haven't spoken to any of them since. David found me in the parking lot, crying angry tears and shaking with adrenaline. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't try to convince me to go back inside and work things out. He just held me while I fell apart, and then he drove us home. The next week I changed my phone number. I blocked them all on social media. I had my mail forwarded to a new P.O. box, so they couldn't even send letters to my apartment. I went completely no contact, and for the first time in my life I chose my own peace over their approval. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I wondered if I was being too dramatic, too sensitive. There were moments when I missed the idea of having a family, even if the reality had been so painful. But then I would remember my mother's words, "We're embarrassed to call you our daughter." And I would remember my father's silence when I needed him most. And I would remember that love isn't supposed to come with conditions and requirements and constant criticism. David and I got married 6 months later in a small ceremony with our chosen family, the friends who had become our real family. My boss walked me down the aisle because he had been more of a father figure to me in 5 years than my actual father had been in 30. It was the most beautiful day of my life, and for the first time I wasn't missing the people who weren't there. I built a life without them. A good life. A life filled with people who celebrated my successes instead of resenting them. People who loved me for who I was instead of who they thought I should be. I thought that was the end of the story. I thought I had closed that chapter forever. But life has a way of surprising you, even when you think you've got everything figured out. And sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the same people who end up teaching you the most important lessons about love, forgiveness, and what family really means. I just never imagined that lesson would come in the form of a phone call that would change everything I thought I knew about my father, and about myself. 2 years passed in blessed silence. 2 years of building my marriage with David, excelling at work, and surrounding myself with people who actually valued me. I had honestly started to believe that I was completely over my family drama. I rarely thought about them anymore, and when I did, it was with the kind of detached sadness you feel for people you used to know. I was wrong about being over it. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was getting ready for work, rushing around our apartment because I had an important presentation that day. My phone rang and I almost ignored it because I didn't recognize the number. But something made me answer. "Hello, Jessica? Is this Jessica?" The voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it immediately. "Yes, this is Jessica. Who is this?" "It's Margaret, honey. Margaret Wilson. Your mom's friend from church." My stomach dropped. Margaret had been my parents' friend for as long as I could remember. She was one of those family friends who had watched me grow up, who had always been kind to me even when my own family wasn't. "Hi, Mrs. Wilson," I said, but my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. "How did you get this number?" There was a pause, and in that pause I knew something terrible was coming. "Honey, I'm so sorry to be the one to tell you this, but your father passed away yesterday. He had a heart attack at work. It was very sudden." The world stopped. I heard the words, but they didn't make sense. My father was only 58. He was healthy, or at least I thought he was. But then I realized I didn't actually know anything about his health because we hadn't spoken in 2 years. "Jessica? Are you there, honey?" "I'm here," I managed to say, but my voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. "The funeral is Thursday at 2 o'clock at St. Mary's. I thought you should know." After I hung up, I just stood there in my bedroom, still holding my phone, trying to process what I just heard. David found me like that 20 minutes later when he came to see why I was taking so long. Jess? What's wrong? My father is dead, I said, and saying the words out loud made them real in a way that was devastating. The grief hit me like a physical blow. Not just grief for losing him, but grief for all the conversations we'd never have, all the reconciliation that would never happen, all the questions I'd never get to ask him. David held me while I cried, and then he very gently asked the question I'd been avoiding. Do you want to go to the funeral? I didn't know. Part of me wanted to stay as far away from my family as possible, but part of me knew that if I didn't go, I would regret it for the rest of my life. Whatever had happened between us, he was still my father. I think I have to, I said finally. David offered to come with me, but I knew that would just make things more complicated. This was something I had to do alone. The funeral home was exactly as I remembered it from my childhood, when we'd attended services for various elderly relatives. It smelled like flowers and sadness, and the lighting was that specific dim golden color that's supposed to be comforting, but just makes everything feel surreal. I walked in wearing a simple black dress, my hair pulled back, trying to look as unremarkable as possible. I wasn't there to make a statement or cause drama. I just wanted to say goodbye to my father in whatever way I could. But the moment I stepped into the main room, I knew this was going to be harder than I'd imagined. There was my mother, dressed in black, surrounded by friends and family members who were offering condolences and support. She looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow, but when she saw me, her face hardened into an expression I knew all too well. Ryan was standing next to her, also accepting sympathy from the gathered crowd. He'd grown a beard since I'd last seen him, and he looked more mature, but when our eyes met across the room, his expression was cold. I had hoped that grief might soften the edges of our conflict, that maybe in the face of death, we could put aside our differences long enough to mourn our father together. I was naive. I found a seat in the back, hoping to blend into the crowd and just observe the service quietly. But I should have known that in a room full of people who had known me since childhood, anonymity was impossible. Mrs. Patterson, one of my mother's oldest friends, spotted me first. "Oh my goodness, Jessica," she said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "I didn't expect to see you here." The comment wasn't necessarily malicious, but it drew attention to me in exactly the way I'd been hoping to avoid. Heads turned, conversations stopped, and suddenly I felt like I was on display. That's when my mother made her move. She walked over to Mrs. Patterson with this smile that didn't reach her eyes, and I heard her say, in a voice that was just loud enough to be overheard by several people, "Oh, you must be thinking of someone else, Helen. We don't have a daughter." I felt like I'd been slapped. She looked right at me when she said it, making sure I heard every word. Then she turned back to Mrs. Patterson and continued, "We just have our son Ryan. He's been such a comfort during this difficult time." The cruelty of it took my breath away. Even here, even at my father's funeral, she was going to pretend I didn't exist. But she wasn't done. Throughout the service, I watched her play the role of the grieving widow who was supported by her devoted only child. When people asked about family, she talked about Ryan. When the pastor mentioned the family that survived my father, she nodded toward Ryan. When they talked about how my father's legacy would live on through his children, she squeezed Ryan's hand. I sat in the back row, completely erased from my own father's funeral narrative. The eulogy was the hardest part. Ryan stood up to speak about our father, and his words were beautiful and heartfelt. He talked about Dad's love of music, his terrible jokes, his dedication to family. He talked about fishing trips and baseball games, and all the memories that made up a father-son relationship. But he never mentioned me. Not once. It was like I had never existed, like I had never been part of those family memories, like my father had only ever had one child. I sat there listening to my brother rewrite our family history in real time, erasing me completely from the story of the man who had raised me, and I felt something inside me break that I didn't even know was still whole. When the service ended, people began to file past the casket to pay their final respects. I waited until the crowd had thinned, and then I approached alone. He looked peaceful, smaller than I remembered, but still unmistakably my father. I wanted to say something profound, something that would make sense of our complicated relationship and all the years of missed opportunities. But all I could manage was a whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry we never figured this out." That's when I felt a hand on my shoulder. For just a moment, I thought maybe it was my mother or Ryan, that maybe they had realized how cruel they were being and wanted to share this moment of grief with me. But when I turned around, it was Margaret Wilson, the family friend who had called to tell me about his death. "I'm glad you came, honey," she said quietly. "Your father would have wanted you here." "Would he?" I asked because honestly I wasn't sure anymore. She looked around to make sure no one was listening, and then she leaned closer to me. "Your father talked about you more than you know," she said. "He was proud of you, Jessica. He kept track of your promotions, your marriage, everything. He just didn't know how to bridge the gap that had formed between you and the rest of the family." Her words were kind, but they also made the loss feel even more devastating. If he was proud of me, if he did care, why couldn't he ever find a way to show it when it mattered? As people began to leave, I found myself standing alone near the casket, watching my family accept condolences and make plans for the reception afterward. No one approached me. No one invited me to join them. I was a stranger at my own father's funeral. That's when I overheard a conversation that made me realize just how thoroughly I had been erased from the family narrative. "Such a tragedy," one woman was saying to my mother. "But at least he had Ryan. At least he got to see his son succeed and build a life." "Yes," my mother replied. "Ryan was everything to him. His only child, really. They had such a special bond." I stood there, invisible, listening to my mother tell people that my father's only child was Ryan. Not just that Ryan was the favorite or the better child, but that I literally didn't exist. The woman asking the questions looked confused for a moment, and I thought maybe she was going to ask about me. Maybe someone would remember that there had been a daughter, that I was part of this family's story. But my mother quickly changed the subject, and the moment passed. That's when I realized that this wasn't just about the fight we'd had 2 years ago. This was about something deeper, something that had been building for my entire life. In their minds, I had never really been part of this family. I had always been the outsider, the mistake, the child who didn't fit their vision of what a family should look like. I left the funeral home that day understanding that there would be no reconciliation, no healing, no moment of coming together in grief. Even death couldn't bridge the gap between us. I drove home in a fog of sadness and anger and confusion, and when David asked me how it went, all I could say was, "They acted like I never existed." But I was wrong about that being the end of the story. Because a week later, I got a phone call that would change everything I thought I knew about my father, about our relationship, and about what family really means. Sometimes the people who can't show you love in life find a way to show it in death. And sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. The call came exactly 1 week after the funeral. I was back at work, trying to lose myself in projects and deadlines, trying to pretend that the hollow feeling in my chest was just temporary. David had been amazing, giving me space when I needed it and comfort when I asked for it, but I could tell he was worried about me. I was in the middle of reviewing a marketing campaign when my assistant buzzed me. "Jessica, there's a Mr. Robert Harrison on line 2. He says he's calling about your father's estate." I stared at the phone for a moment, confused. Estate? What estate? My father had been a middle manager at an insurance company. As far as I knew, he didn't have anything that would require a lawyer to handle. "Hello, this is Jessica. Miss Jessica Martinez?" The voice was professional, formal. Yes, that's me. Well, it's Jessica Davis now, but Martinez was my maiden name. Ms. Davis, my name is Robert Harrison. I'm an attorney, and I was your father's lawyer. I'm calling because I need to discuss some matters regarding his will and life insurance policy. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest. I think you might have the wrong person, Mr. Harrison. I haven't spoken to my family in 2 years. I'm sure whatever needs to be handled should go through my mother or my brother. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Actually, Ms. Davis, that's exactly why I'm calling you. You are the primary beneficiary of your father's life insurance policy, and the sole heir mentioned in his will. I need to schedule a time for us to meet, so I can go over the details with you. The world tilted sideways. I'm sorry, what did you say? Your father named you as the beneficiary of his life insurance policy, which is substantial, and he left you everything in his will. His house, his investments, everything. I have a letter here that he wrote specifically for you as well. I couldn't speak. I literally could not form words. Ms. Davis? Are you still there? I don't understand, I finally managed. That can't be right. We weren't even speaking. My family doesn't even acknowledge that I exist. I understand this must be shocking, Mr. Harrison said gently. But I assure you everything is in order. Your father was very specific about his wishes. He updated his will and changed his beneficiary information about 3 years ago. Would you be able to come to my office tomorrow afternoon? I think it would be better to discuss this in person. I somehow managed to schedule the appointment and hung up the phone. Then I just sat there, staring at my computer screen trying to process what I just heard. My father, the man who had stayed silent while his family tore me apart, had left me everything. The man who couldn't defend me at a family dinner had chosen me as his sole heir. It didn't make sense. The next day, I sat in Mr. Harrison's office, a modest space lined with law books and family photos, and learned things about my father that I had never known. Your father first came to see me about 4 years ago, Mr. Harrison began, opening a thick folder. He said he wanted to update his will, because he was concerned about how his assets would be distributed. He pulled out a document and slid it across the desk to me. This is his life insurance policy. The beneficiary was changed from your mother to you 3 years ago. The policy is worth $500,000. $500,000. I stared at the number, unable to believe what I was seeing. But why? I asked. Why would he do this without telling me? Without telling anyone? Mr. Harrison smiled sadly. He talked about you quite a bit during our meetings, Ms. Davis. He was incredibly proud of your accomplishments. He knew about your promotions, your marriage, your success. He said you were the only one in the family who had really made something of yourself through hard work and determination. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes. He also said, Mr. Harrison continued, that he regretted not standing up for you more when you were growing up. He knew that your mother and brother didn't appreciate you the way they should have, and he felt guilty about his own role in that dynamic. Then why didn't he ever say anything? I asked and my voice cracked. Why didn't he ever defend me when it mattered? He said he was a coward, Mr. Harrison replied quietly. His words, not mine. He said he had chosen peace over principle too many times, and he wanted to make sure that his final act as your father was one that honored who you really are. He reached into the folder again and pulled out an envelope with my name written on it in my father's handwriting. He left this for you. He said it would explain everything he couldn't say while he was alive. My hands were shaking as I took the envelope. Inside was a letter, 3 pages long, written in the careful script I remembered from birthday cards and school permission slips. My dearest Jessica, it began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have probably just learned some surprising news about my will and life insurance. I imagine you're confused, maybe even angry, and I don't blame you. I owe you an explanation, and I owe you an apology that is long overdue. First, the apology. I am sorry for every time I stayed silent when you needed me to speak up. I am sorry for every time I let your mother and brother make you feel less than you are. I am sorry for being a coward when you needed me to be brave. I am sorry for all the times I told you I was proud of you in private, but couldn't find the courage to say it in public when it would have mattered. I want you to know that every single achievement of yours filled me with more pride than I ever knew how to express. When you graduated valedictorian, I carried the newspaper clipping in my wallet for months. When you got your first promotion, I bragged about you to everyone at work even though I never told you that. When you got married, I was so happy that you had found someone who could see how incredible you are. But I was raised in a generation that believed keeping peace in the family was more important than standing up for what was right. I was taught that a man's job was to avoid conflict, not create it. I was wrong, and my silence cost us both so much. Your mother and I have fundamental differences about what makes a good life and what makes a good daughter. She believes that success is measured by how well you conform to traditional expectations. I believe that success is measured by character, integrity, and the courage to be true to yourself. You have always embodied everything I value most in a person. When you left that wedding 2 years ago, part of me wanted to follow you. I wanted to tell you that you were right, that you deserved better, that I was proud of the woman you had become. But I didn't, and I have regretted that silence every day since. I know that money cannot make up for years of feeling unsupported and unvalued. But I hope that this gesture will show you what I could never find the words to say while I was alive. You are the child who inherited my values. You are the one who worked for everything you achieved. You are the one who has integrity and strength and independence. You are the one who deserves to benefit from the life I built. I have been putting money away for years, investing and saving, because I wanted to leave you something that would give you even more freedom to live life on your own terms. I know you don't need my money to be successful, but I hope you will accept it as a symbol of all the support I should have given you while I was alive. Your mother and Ryan will be angry about this decision. They will not understand it. But I hope that you will understand that this is my way of finally standing up for you, finally choosing you, finally putting you first the way I should have done all along. You are an extraordinary woman, Jessica. You are everything I hoped you would become and more than I ever dared to dream. I am so proud to be your father, even if I was never very good at showing it. Live your beautiful life, sweetheart. Surround yourself with people who see your worth. And please know that wherever I am now, I am finally free to say what I always should have said. You are perfect exactly as you are. And you were always my greatest accomplishment. All my love and pride. Dad, P.S. Use this money to do something that makes you happy. Take that trip to Europe you and David always talk about. Buy the house with the big garden you've been dreaming of. Start that business you mentioned once. Do whatever brings you joy, and know that it brings me joy too. By the time I finished reading, I was crying so hard I could barely see the words on the page. Mr. Harrison quietly handed me a box of tissues and waited while I tried to pull myself together. There's more, he said gently when I was ready. In addition to the life insurance, he had a portfolio of investments worth about $200,000. He also owned some land that he inherited from his father, which he never told your family about. That's worth approximately another $100,000. I looked up at him in shock. $800,000? He was very careful with money, Mr. Harrison explained. He lived below his means for years so he could leave you something substantial. He said he wanted to make sure you had the kind of financial security that would give you choices. Did he ever mention why he kept this secret from my family? Mr. Harrison nodded. He said he knew that if your mother and brother were aware of his assets, they would expect to inherit everything. He didn't want there to be any confusion about his intentions. He wanted his final act to be completely clear. He was choosing you because you were the child who had earned his respect and admiration. I sat in that lawyer's office for another hour, signing papers and learning about bank accounts and investments I'd never known existed. My father, the quiet man who had never stood up for me in life, had spent years preparing to stand up for me in death. When I finally left Mr. Harrison's office, I felt like I was walking through a dream. Everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my father had been turned upside down. He had seen me. He had been proud of me. He had chosen me. But I also felt something else. A deep sadness that it had taken his death for me to learn how much he loved me. Why couldn't he have found a way to show me this while he was alive? Why did I have to go through years of feeling unwanted and unworthy when he had been proud of me all along? I called David from my car and told him everything. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. "How are you feeling?" he finally asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. Happy, sad, angry, grateful, confused. Everything all at once. What happens now? That was the question, wasn't it? What happens when you discover that everything you thought you knew about your family was wrong? What happens when the people who rejected you find out that you were the chosen one all along? I was about to find out because I knew that once my mother and Ryan learned about the inheritance, everything was going to change. The family that had denied my existence was about to remember that I existed very clearly. And I was going to have to decide how to handle their sudden change of heart. I had exactly 3 days of peace before the storm hit. 3 days to process my father's letter, to begin understanding what his inheritance really meant, to start grieving not just his death but all the years we'd lost because he couldn't find his voice while he was alive. David and I spent those 3 days talking through everything. The money, the letter, what it all meant for our future. We decided we wouldn't make any big decisions right away. I needed time to process this emotional earthquake before I could think clearly about practical matters. But on Thursday morning, my carefully constructed peace was shattered by a phone call that I should have seen coming. I was having coffee in our kitchen, still in my pajamas, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it. "Jessica? Thank God I found you." The voice was my mother's, but it sounded different. Strained. Almost desperate. "How did you get this number?" I asked, immediately on guard. "I hired someone to find you," she said, and I could hear her crying. "Jessica, honey, there's been a terrible mistake." "Honey." She called me honey. She hadn't used a term of endearment for me in years. "What kind of mistake?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what she was talking about. "The insurance company says your father left his life insurance to you. There must be some error with the paperwork. Daddy would never have meant to leave us with nothing. You know how much he loved Ryan and me." There it was. The reason for this sudden phone call. This sudden flood of emotion. Not grief over losing her husband, not regret over how she treated me, but panic over losing money she'd assumed was hers. "Mom, I don't think there was any mistake," I said carefully. "Of course there was." Her voice was getting higher, more frantic. "You hadn't even spoken to him in 2 years. Why would he leave everything to you when Ryan and I were the ones who were here, the ones who took care of him?" I felt that familiar anger rising in my chest, but I tried to stay calm. "I don't know what to tell you, Mom. I'm just as surprised as you are." "Well, you have to fix this," she said, and now her tone was shifting from desperate to demanding. "You have to call the insurance company and tell them to split it properly. Ryan and I are the real family. We're the ones who deserve his legacy." "I'm not going to do that." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "What did you say?" she asked, and her voice was ice cold now. "I said I'm not going to do that. If Dad wanted the money to go to me, then that was his choice to make. Jessica Marie Martinez, you listen to me right now." She was using my full maiden name, the voice she'd used when I was in trouble as a child. Your father was not in his right mind at the end. He was clearly confused or manipulated by someone. No loving father would leave his wife and son with nothing while giving everything to a daughter who abandoned the family. I didn't abandon anyone, I said, and my voice was getting stronger. I left because you told me you were embarrassed to call me your daughter. I left because you made it clear that I didn't belong in this family. That's ridiculous, she snapped. You're being overdramatic just like always. We had one little disagreement, and you threw a tantrum and ran away. Now you're trying to punish us by stealing what rightfully belongs to your family. One little disagreement. That's what she was calling the public humiliation at the wedding, the years of being compared unfavorably to Ryan, the lifetime of being made to feel like my achievements were character flaws. Mom, I'm not stealing anything. Dad made his choice. Well, then you need to make the right choice now, she said. You need to think about what's fair, what's right. Ryan is your brother. I'm your mother. We're your family, and family takes care of each other. Family takes care of each other, I repeated slowly. That's interesting, because for the past 2 years you've been telling people that you don't have a daughter. At Dad's funeral, you literally denied my existence to anyone who asked about me. That's not fair, she said, but her voice was weaker now. You hurt us, Jessica. You left us. What were we supposed to say? You were supposed to say that you missed me. You were supposed to say that you wanted to work things out. You were supposed to act like parents who loved their daughter, even when she disappointed them. I heard her sniffle, and for a moment, I thought maybe we were finally going to have an honest conversation about what had really happened between us. I was wrong. Fine, she said, and her voice was hard again. If you want to be stubborn about this, then Ryan will come talk to you. Maybe you'll listen to your brother. Before I could respond, she hung up. I should have known that wouldn't be the end of it. Ryan showed up at my apartment that afternoon. David answered the door, and I heard voices in the hallway before Ryan walked into our living room like he owned the place. He looked around with obvious judgment, taking in our furniture, our art, our life that he'd never been invited to see. Nice place, he said, but his tone made it clear he didn't mean it as a compliment. I guess the big corporate job has been paying off. Hello, Ryan, I said, staying seated on the couch. I'm surprised to see you here. Are you? Because I'm not surprised that you're trying to steal our inheritance. David stepped forward. I think you should watch your tone. Ryan looked at David like he was noticing him for the first time. And you must be the husband. The one who convinced Jessica that she was too good for her own family. Nobody convinced me of anything, I said before David could respond. I made my own decisions based on how I was treated. Ryan sat down across from me without being invited. Look, Jess, I don't want to fight with you. We're both grieving Dad's death. But you have to admit that this inheritance situation is crazy. Is it? Yes. You cut us out of your life. You didn't call, you didn't visit, you didn't even send a Christmas card. And now you're surprised that we're upset about you getting everything. I'm not surprised that you're upset, I said. I'm disappointed that you're only talking to me now because of money. That's not fair, Ryan said, and he actually looked hurt. I've missed you, Jess. We all have. But you made it impossible to have a relationship with you. How did I make it impossible? You became this person we didn't recognize. You got all serious and career-focused and judgmental. You acted like you were better than us. I stared at my brother, this man who had been the golden child our entire lives, and I realized that he genuinely believed what he was saying. In his mind, my success had been the problem. My ambition had been the character flaw. My independence had been the betrayal. Ryan, do you remember what Mom said to me at Emily's wedding? He shifted uncomfortably. That was a long time ago. People say things when they're upset. She said they were embarrassed to call me their daughter. She said I was selfish and self-centered because I focused on my career. You agreed with her. You said I thought I was better than everyone else. Maybe we all said things we didn't mean that night. Did you not mean them? Because it seemed like you meant them. It seemed like you'd been thinking those things for a long time. Ryan was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe he was actually reflecting on what had happened. But then he leaned forward and his expression changed. You know what, Jessica? Maybe we did mean some of it. Maybe you did need to hear some hard truths about yourself. Such as the fact that you've always been selfish. You've always put yourself first. Even now, you're more concerned with being right than with taking care of your family. I felt David tense beside me, but I held up a hand to signal that I could handle this. Taking care of my family, I repeated. You mean taking care of the family that disowned me? Nobody disowned you. You left. You chose your pride over your family, and now you're choosing money over your family. Some things never change. That's when I realized that this conversation was never going to go anywhere productive. Ryan wasn't here to apologize or to rebuild our relationship. He was here to manipulate me into giving him money. Just like our mother's phone call, this was all about what I could do for them, not about any genuine desire to reconnect. Ryan, I want you to leave now. Jess, come on. Be reasonable. Think about Mom. Think about how Dad would want his money to be used. I am thinking about how Dad would want his money to be used. He made his wishes very clear. He wasn't thinking straight at the end. He was probably depressed or confused. Actually, I said, standing up, he was thinking very clearly. He left me a letter explaining exactly why he made the choices he did. Ryan's eyes widened. What letter? A letter telling me how proud he was of me. A letter apologizing for not standing up for me when you and Mom were tearing me down. A letter explaining that he chose me because I was the child who had earned his respect. I watched the color drain from Ryan's face. That's impossible, he said quietly. It's not impossible. It's just not what you expected. Dad saw what was happening in this family and he made a choice. He chose the child who worked hard and built a life based on values he respected. Ryan stood up abruptly. This is unbelievable. You really think you're better than us, don't you? No, Ryan. I think I'm different from you. And apparently so did Dad. Fine, he said, heading toward the door. Keep the money. But don't expect us to welcome you back into the family when you realize that money can't buy you love. I'm not trying to buy love, I said to his retreating figure. I already have love. I have a husband who supports me, friends who celebrate my successes, and a chosen family that values me for who I am. I don't need to buy what I already have. After he left, David and I sat in our living room in stunned silence. Are you okay? He asked finally. You know what? Think I am. For the first time in my adult life, I think I actually am okay. Because sitting there, having just been accused of stealing money that was rightfully mine, having just been told once again that my success was a character flaw, I realized something important. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had finally gotten it from the person whose opinion had mattered most to me, even if it came too late for our relationship. And I had built a life filled with people who loved me exactly as I was. But the drama wasn't over. Not even close. Because word was spreading through the family about the inheritance, and suddenly everyone had an opinion about Jessica, the prodigal daughter who had mysteriously inherited everything. The phone calls started the next day. The phone calls came from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Cousins who had barely acknowledged me at family gatherings suddenly wanted to catch up and hear about my life. Aunts who had always sided with my mother were now calling to express their condolences and tell me how much my father had loved me. It was fascinating and disgusting at the same time. My cousin Emily, whose wedding had been the scene of my final confrontation with my family, called on Friday afternoon. Jessica, I've been thinking about you so much since Uncle Mark passed, she said, using the sweet, concerned tone that people use when they want something. I feel terrible about what happened at my wedding. I should have said something when Aunt Linda was being so harsh. It's okay, Emily, I said, because it actually was okay now. I had moved past needing apologies from people who had watched me be mistreated and done nothing. I hope you know that not everyone in the family agreed with how you were treated, she continued. A lot of us always admired how independent and successful you were. That's kind of you to say. I also wanted you to know that if you need any advice about handling an inheritance, my husband works in finance. We'd be happy to help you make good decisions with Uncle Mark's money. And there it was. The real reason for the call. I had similar conversations with 3 other relatives that week. All of them following the same script. Condolences, apologies for not speaking up sooner, offers to help me manage my newfound wealth. The most pathetic call came from my mother's sister, Aunt Carol, who had always been particularly critical of my career focus. You know, Jessica, she said after her own fake apology, your father always told me how proud he was of you. He used to say that you were the smartest of all the kids in the family. This was a complete lie. Aunt Carol had never missed an opportunity to tell me that I was too ambitious for my own good, and that I needed to learn to be more feminine and family-oriented like your cousin Sarah. But the most revealing call came from Margaret Wilson, the family friend who had told me about my father's death. Jessica, honey, I wanted to check on you, she said. I know this inheritance situation has stirred up a lot of drama in the family. It has, I agreed. I hope you know that your father talked to me about his decision. He was very thoughtful about it, very deliberate. He wasn't confused or manipulated like some people are saying. People are saying that? Margaret sighed. Your mother has been calling everyone, telling them that you somehow tricked your father into changing his will. She's saying that you manipulated him while he was grieving your estrangement. I felt a familiar surge of anger, but it was duller now, less sharp. I was beginning to understand that this was just who my mother was, and no amount of evidence or explanation was going to change her narrative. She's also been asking people to call you and convince you to do the right thing, Margaret continued. That's why you've been getting all these calls from relatives you haven't heard from in years. I figured as much. Jessica, I want you to know something. Your father came to see me about 6 months before he died. He told me about the inheritance and he told me why. He said he had watched you build a life based on hard work and integrity, and he wanted to honor that. He said Ryan had always expected things to be handed to him, and your mother had always enabled that expectation. He didn't want his death to continue that pattern. Hearing this from someone who had known my father for decades, someone who had no financial stake in the situation, gave me a peace I hadn't realized I was still searching for. He also said, Margaret continued, that he hoped you would use the money to live the life you deserved, not to try to buy back a family that had never appreciated you. After I hung up with Margaret, I sat in my kitchen and made a decision. I was done responding to manipulative phone calls and surprise visits. I was done justifying my father's choices to people who only cared about his money. I was done being made to feel guilty for receiving a gift that came with so much love and thought behind it. David and I spent that weekend making plans for our future. We talked about the house we wanted to buy, the trip to Europe we'd been postponing, the possibility of me starting my own consulting business. We talked about setting up a scholarship fund in my father's name, something that would honor his memory in a way that reflected his values. On Monday morning, I called Mr. Harrison and asked him to draft a letter that would be sent to my immediate family. The letter was simple and direct. I have received the inheritance that my father chose to leave me, along with the letter explaining his decision. I understand that this was not what you expected, and I'm sorry that you're disappointed. However, I will not be contesting his will or redistributing his assets. His choices were deliberate and thoughtful, and I intend to honor them. I hope that in time you can come to understand and respect his wishes. I will not be discussing this matter further. The letter went out on Tuesday. By Wednesday, I had 17 missed calls from my mother and 6 angry voicemails from Ryan. I didn't return any of them. Instead, David and I went house hunting. We found a beautiful colonial with a big garden. Exactly the kind of home I dreamed of having someday. When we made the offer, I paid the down payment in cash using my inheritance, and I felt my father's presence in that moment. I could almost hear him saying, "This is what I wanted for you, sweetheart. This freedom, this choice, this life built on your own terms." A month later, I quit my corporate job and started my own marketing consultancy. The inheritance gave me the financial security to take the risk, to bet on myself in a way I'd never been able to before. My first client was a nonprofit that provided business mentorship to young women, and I charged them exactly half my normal rate because it felt like the kind of work my father would have been proud of. The business took off faster than I'd expected. Apparently, years of climbing the corporate ladder had given me skills and connections that translated well to entrepreneurship. Within 6 months, I was making more money than I'd ever made as an employee, and I was doing work that felt meaningful and fulfilling. We established the Mark Martinez Memorial Scholarship for first-generation college students pursuing business degrees. Every year, we give a $10,000 scholarship to a young person who demonstrates the kind of work ethic and determination that my father valued. The first recipient was a girl named Maria, who was working 2 jobs to put herself through college while supporting her younger siblings. When I handed her the check, I thought about how proud my father would have been to see his money helping someone who reminded me so much of myself at that age. David and I took that trip to Europe, spending 3 weeks exploring Italy, France, and Spain. We ate amazing food, saw incredible art, and talked for hours about our dreams and plans. On our last night in Rome, as we were sitting at a sidewalk cafe watching the sunset, David raised his wine glass and said, "To your father, who found a way to give you wings even after he was gone." I cried happy tears that night. The first tears I'd shed for my father that weren't mixed with anger or regret. But the most meaningful thing I did with the inheritance was also the simplest. I framed my father's letter and hung it in my home office, right above my desk where I could see it every day. Whenever I doubted myself or felt uncertain about a business decision, I would read his words about integrity and independence and living life on my own terms. The family drama eventually died down, mostly because I refused to engage with it. My mother stopped calling when she realized I wasn't going to change my mind. Ryan apparently told people that I was dead to him, which was fine with me because he'd been dead to me long before money entered the picture. Some of the relatives who had called to offer their fake support and real financial advice stopped speaking to me when they realized I wasn't going to share the wealth or seek their counsel. Others, the few who had genuinely cared about me, remained in my life and became part of my chosen family. The most surprising development came about 8 months after my father's death. Emily, my cousin whose wedding had been the scene of my family's final rejection, reached out to apologize sincerely for not standing up for me that night. She admitted that she'd been uncomfortable with how I was treated, but had been too afraid of family drama to say anything. "I keep thinking about how brave you were that night," she told me over coffee. "How you stood up for yourself even when no one else would. I want to be that brave in my own life." Emily and I began rebuilding a genuine relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. She became one of my first clients when her own business needed marketing help, and she paid my full rate because, as she said, family should support each other's success, not expect discounts. Through Emily, I learned that the extended family's opinion of the inheritance situation was more mixed than I'd realized. Several relatives had privately expressed that they thought my father's decision made sense, given how hard I'd worked and how much I'd achieved on my own. But most had been afraid to voice these opinions publicly because of my mother's anger and Ryan's wounded pride. This taught me something important about family dynamics. Sometimes the loudest voices aren't representative of everyone's feelings, and sometimes people support you in private, even when they can't do it in public. As my first year without my father came to an end, I realized that grief is a strange and complex thing. I was no longer mourning the relationship we'd never had, because his letter had shown me that in many ways, we'd had a deeper connection than I'd realized. Instead, I was mourning the conversations we'd never have, the advice he'd never give me, the pride he'd never get to express directly. But I was also grateful. Grateful for his final gift, which wasn't really about money at all. It was about validation, about finally being chosen, about having someone see my worth and honor it in the most concrete way possible. The inheritance had given me financial freedom, but more importantly, it had given me emotional freedom. Freedom from needing approval from people who were never going to give it. Freedom from trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I was worthless. Freedom to build a life surrounded by people who celebrated my successes instead of resenting them. 1 year after my father's death, I was standing in the garden of the house I'd bought with his money, watching David plant roses that would bloom every spring as a reminder of new beginnings. My business was thriving, our marriage was stronger than ever, and I was genuinely happy in a way I'd never been before. That's when I realized that the best revenge really is living well. Not because I was trying to prove anything to my family, but because I was finally free to live authentically, without the weight of their disapproval or the constant need for their validation. My father's gift had given me more than money. It had given me permission to stop trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it, and to focus instead on the love I already had from people who truly saw me. And in the end, that permission was worth more than any inheritance could ever be. 2 years have passed since I received my father's letter, and I still read it sometimes when I need to remember who I am and where I came from. It sits framed above my desk in the home office of the house he helped me buy, in the business he helped me start, in the life he helped me build. But today, as I'm writing this story, I want to share more of his words with you. Because his letter wasn't just a personal message to me. It was a lesson about love, about courage, about what it really means to be family. I've already told you the main parts of what he wrote, but there were other paragraphs, other thoughts that have stayed with me every day since I first read them. I know that your mother will be angry about this decision, he wrote. She will say that I was manipulated or confused, that I wasn't thinking clearly. But I want you to know that I have never been more clear about anything in my life. I have been watching both of my children for 32 years, and I know exactly who each of you has become. Ryan is a good person with a kind heart, but he has never learned the value of hard work because everything has always come easily to him. He has never had to struggle, never had to prove himself, never had to develop the strength that comes from overcoming obstacles. This isn't his fault, it's ours. Your mother and I created this situation by making his path too smooth. You, on the other hand, have faced every challenge with grace and determination. You have worked for everything you've achieved. You have built your character through struggle, your strength through adversity, your wisdom through experience. You have become the kind of person I always hoped to raise. I regret that I didn't see this clearly enough while you were growing up. I regret that I let your mother's fears about you being too independent influence my behavior toward you. I regret that I made you feel like you had to choose between success and family, when the truth is that your success is what makes me most proud to call you my daughter. Your mother believes that love means protecting people from the consequences of their choices, making their paths as easy as possible, accepting mediocrity as long as it comes with compliance. I have come to believe that love means preparing people to stand on their own, supporting their dreams even when they're different from your own, celebrating their strength even when it makes you feel small. By those standards, you are the child who learned love correctly. You love David by supporting his dreams and celebrating his successes. You love your friends by being honest with them and standing by them through difficulties. You love yourself by refusing to accept less than you deserve. I should have loved you the same way while I was alive. I should have stood up for you, celebrated you publicly, defended your choices even when they made other people uncomfortable. I should have shown you that your father was proud of the woman you were becoming, not disappointed that you weren't becoming someone else. I cannot undo my failures as your father while I was alive, but I can try to make amends through this final act. When you receive this inheritance, I want you to know that it comes with no strings attached, no expectations, no obligations. It comes with only love and pride and the hope that you will use it to continue building the beautiful life you have already started. You owe nothing to people who made you feel small. You owe nothing to people who punished you for being successful. You owe nothing to people who demanded that you diminish yourself so they could feel better about their own choices. You owe everything to yourself, to the people who have supported your dreams, and to the future you are still creating. Live boldly, my darling daughter. Live authentically. Live without apology for being exactly who you are meant to be. Reading those words now, 2 years later, I understand something about forgiveness that I didn't understand before. Forgiveness isn't about excusing someone's behavior or pretending that they didn't hurt you. Forgiveness is about understanding that people are complicated, that they can love you and fail you at the same time, and that sometimes the best gift they can give you is the clarity that comes from their honesty about their own limitations. My father failed me in many ways while he was alive, but he gave me something precious in his death. The truth about how he really felt, and the freedom to stop trying to earn something I had already had. I think about my mother and Ryan sometimes, but not with anger anymore. I think about them with sadness for what they've lost, for the opportunities they've missed, for the relationships they've destroyed through their own choices. My mother lost a daughter who would have loved her unconditionally if she had been allowed to. Ryan lost a sister who would have celebrated his successes and supported him through his failures if he had treated her like family instead of competition. They chose pride over love, ego over connection, conditional acceptance over genuine relationship. Those choices have consequences, and those consequences are not my responsibility to fix. I've learned that some people will only value you when you're gone, will only see your worth when it's too late to benefit from it, will only want a relationship with you when that relationship comes with financial advantages. I've also learned that other people will see your value from the beginning, will celebrate your successes as if they were their own, will stand by you through struggles and triumphs, alike simply because they love who you are. The difference between these two types of people is the difference between conditional love and unconditional love, between transactional relationships and authentic relationships, between family by blood and family by choice. My father's letter taught me that biology doesn't guarantee love, shared DNA doesn't ensure loyalty, and growing up in the same house doesn't mean you're truly family. But it also taught me that love can exist in complicated ways, that pride can be silent but still real, and that sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is the validation you've been searching for your whole life. Today, I run a successful business that employs 12 people, all of whom are treated with the respect and appreciation I always wished for in my family. David and I live in a home filled with laughter and support and genuine affection. We're trying to start a family of our own, and if we're blessed with children, they will grow up knowing that their worth isn't conditional on their achievements, their love isn't dependent on their compliance, and their place in our family is secure regardless of what paths they choose to follow. The scholarship fund we created in my father's name has helped 15 young people pursue their education and their dreams. Each year when I meet the new recipient, I see a little bit of myself in their determination, their hunger for opportunity, their willingness to work hard for a better future. And each year, I think about how proud my father would be to see his money helping people who remind me of the daughter he was always proud of but never quite knew how to show it. 6 months ago, I got a call from a lawyer representing my mother's estate. She had passed away after a brief illness, and apparently, she had left everything to Ryan. But the lawyer was calling because there was a sealed envelope marked with my name among her papers. Inside was a short note written in my mother's careful handwriting. Jessica, I was wrong about many things, but I was most wrong about you. You became everything I was afraid to let you become, and you became it beautifully. I hope someday you can forgive a foolish old woman who confused control with love and fear with protection. Your father was right to choose you. You were always the stronger one. Love, Mom. I cried when I read it, not because it changed anything, but because it confirmed something I had finally learned to believe, that my worth was never actually in question, that my value was never actually conditional, and that the people who couldn't see it were missing out on something beautiful, not the other way around. I keep that note in the same frame as my father's letter, because together they tell the complete story of what it means to be chosen, to be valued, and to finally be free. If you're listening to this story and it sounds familiar, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, overlooked despite your achievements, criticized for your success, or made to feel like you have to choose between being yourself and being loved, I want you to know something. You don't have to earn love. You don't have to diminish yourself to make other people comfortable. You don't have to apologize for being successful, independent, or ambitious. And you don't have to wait for someone else to choose you before you choose yourself. Your worth is not determined by other people's ability to see it. Your value is not conditional on other people's approval. Your success is not a character flaw. Your independence is not a betrayal. And your dreams are not selfish. Find the people who celebrate you instead of tolerating you. Build relationships with people who support your growth instead of fearing it. Create a family with people who love you for who you are instead of who they want you to be. And if you're lucky enough to receive a letter like the one my father left me, treasure it not just for the validation it provides, but for the permission it gives you to stop seeking validation from people who will never give it. The best inheritance my father left me wasn't the money. It was the reminder that I was always worthy of love, always deserving of respect, always enough exactly as I was. And so are you. That's the real lesson of this story. Not that money solves everything. Not that inheritance rights always work out fairly. But that sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is the confirmation of what you should have known all along. You are worthy. You are valuable. You are enough. And you always have been.